The galaxy was full of wonders, but for Ethan Ward, life felt small. He was a technician from Earth, one of the newer members of the Galactic Union. While other humans dreamed of adventure, exploration, or war, Ethan spent most of his days repairing air filters, patching power conduits, and checking software logs in maintenance stations scattered across space. He liked his quiet job. It was safe. It was simple. But sometimes when he sat alone in the crew quarters at night, staring at the endless stars outside the window, he felt a deep emptiness inside. Humans were spreading among the stars, but he still felt like a stranger everywhere he went. One evening after a long shift, Ethan's datapad blinked with a strange message. Galactic Harmony AI has completed your compatibility scan. Match found. Candidate pending acceptance. Ethan blinked. He had almost forgotten that 6 months ago, during a routine checkup at a Union station, he had signed a form about the new AI matchmaking program. The Galactic Harmony AI was created to encourage peace by pairing individuals from different species who might build bridges instead of walls. Ethan had thought it was a joke, or at least something that would never affect him, but now the screen showed details. A name, a species, a profile, Kalira of the Dravathi Dominion. The name alone made him sit up straight. The Dravathi were one of the most feared warrior species in the galaxy. They were tall, armored by nature, with strength beyond most known races. And Kalira. He knew that name. Everyone did. General Kalira. The Scourge of Valon. The Deadliest Bride. She was the commander of fleets, conqueror of battlefields, the woman who ended 3 rebellions with her own hands. Every holochannel spoke of her victories. Rumors said no warrior had ever defeated her in single combat. Rumors also said that she could crush a man with one hand, and that she hated weakness above all else. And the AI had matched him, a human janitor with a wrench, to her. Ethan laughed nervously to himself. This must be a mistake. But the datapad displayed a countdown timer. Acceptance required within 72 standard hours. If he refused, the AI would mark him as unwilling and remove him from future scans. If he accepted, he would be sent to Dravathi space to meet Kalira herself. For the next 2 days, Ethan could not focus on work. His crewmates joked about the news when they found out. "You're a dead man," one said. "She'll break you in half." Another clapped him on the back and said, "Better you than me." But at night, Ethan stared at the stars and thought differently. He thought of the way Kalira's face appeared in news recordings. Always proud, always strong, but always alone. The galaxy saw her as a weapon, not a woman. Could it be possible that she had agreed to join the AI program because she too was lonely? On the 3rd day, just before the timer reached 0, Ethan pressed accept. The journey to Dravathi space took 2 weeks by Union shuttle. Ethan sat quietly during most of the flight, reading what little information he could find about Dravathi customs. The guides were full of warnings. Do not show fear. Do not bow too low. Never interrupt a Dravathi warrior when they speak. He memorized every detail, though none of it made him feel calmer. When the shuttle finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, Ethan saw the Dominion's capital world through the viewport. It was a vast planet covered in sharp mountain ranges, dark forests, and glowing fortress cities. Towers of black stone reached toward the sky, lit with crimson lights. It looked more like a world of war than of peace. The shuttle landed in a military spaceport. Ethan stepped out, clutching his small bag, and felt dozens of Dravathi eyes on him. They were huge, armored beings with ridged skin and sharp features. Their voices rumbled like thunder when they spoke among themselves. Some sneered openly at him. A fragile human in their world was almost laughable. 2 warriors in ceremonial armor approached and escorted him through the city. The streets were wide, built for soldiers, not civilians. Statues of war heroes lined the avenues. Banners of crimson and silver snapped in the wind. At the center stood a towering fortress palace, Kalira's seat of power. Ethan's heart pounded as the gates opened. Inside, the air was cooler, dimly lit by glowing crystals. Warriors stood guard at every corner. He was led into a vast hall where at the far end sat Kalira herself. She was taller than any human he had ever seen, her presence filling the hall like a storm. Her armor gleamed black and red, marked with the scars of battle. Her eyes were golden, sharp and unblinking. She sat on a throne of dark stone, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. When Ethan was brought before her, the guards stepped back and left them alone. For a long moment, Kalira simply looked at him. Her gaze was so intense that Ethan felt like she could see straight through him. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was deep, steady, and commanding. "You are the one the AI has chosen for me?" Ethan swallowed hard but kept his voice steady. "Yes, my name is Ethan Ward. From Earth." Kalira tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You are smaller than I expected, fragile, weak. The galaxy fears my name, and the AI sends me this?" Her words could have cut him, but Ethan did not flinch. He met her eyes and said, "Maybe the AI saw something others don't." For the first time, Kalira's expression shifted, just slightly. A faint crease formed in her brow as if she was surprised by his calmness. "You are not afraid?" she asked. "Of you?" Ethan gave a small, nervous smile. "Maybe a little, but not enough to run away." Kalira leaned back in her throne, her golden eyes narrowing. Silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Then she rose from her seat, stepping forward. Her armor clinked softly with each step. Standing before him, she towered over him by at least 2 heads. Ethan's heart raced, but he stood his ground. Kalira looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "The galaxy calls me the Deadliest Bride. Do you understand what that means, human?" "Yes," Ethan said softly. "It means they don't really know you. They only know your battles." Her eyes flickered, almost as if his words had struck a hidden chord. But then her face became hard again. She stepped back and gestured to the side. "You will be given quarters here in the fortress," she said. "You will remain until I decide whether this match is worth my time. Do not waste it." Ethan bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Kalira." She turned away, her cape sweeping behind her, and returned to her throne. But as Ethan was led out of the hall, he thought he saw something, just for a moment, in her eyes. Not anger, not disdain, something else. Something that looked like loneliness. That night, in the guest quarters of the fortress, Ethan sat by the window. The Dravathi city stretched out before him, glowing under the dark sky. He thought about Kalira's stare, her voice, her words. She was everything the galaxy said she was. Powerful, commanding, dangerous. Yet behind all that, Ethan felt there was more. Something hidden, something she kept locked away from everyone else. He wondered if that was why the AI had matched them. Not because he was strong enough to face her in battle, but because maybe, just maybe, he was patient enough to see the person she truly was. And so, Ethan made a silent promise to himself. He would not run. He would not give up. He would stay no matter how hard it was, until he found the truth behind the galaxy's deadliest bride. Ethan Ward woke early in his guest quarters inside Kalira's fortress. The room was spacious, made of polished black stone and decorated with crimson banners, but it still felt cold and unwelcoming. The walls seemed to whisper of wars fought long before his arrival. He dressed in his simple clothes and stood near the window. Outside, he saw the city stirring to life. Dravathi warriors marched in formations along the streets, their heavy boots echoing in rhythm. Shuttles roared above, carrying supplies and soldiers. Everything about this place spoke of strength and discipline. Ethan felt out of place, like a soft feather that had landed in a nest of steel blades. Breakfast with a general later. A guard arrived to escort him to the great hall. Ethan followed in silence, though every step made his nerves tighten. He knew Kalira would be there. When he entered, Kalira was already seated at a long table filled with food. Exotic fruits with thick skins, roasted meats that smelled faintly of spice, and steaming cups of dark liquid covered the surface. The guards and attendants stood far back, leaving Kalira alone at the table. She looked up as Ethan entered. Her golden eyes studied him with the same sharpness as the day before. "Sit," she commanded, her voice low and firm. Ethan sat at the opposite end. A servant placed a plate before him, though the food looked heavier than anything he had ever eaten. He picked carefully, unsure what was safe for a human stomach. Kalira watched him, her fingers tapping lightly against the table. "You are smaller than my warriors, fragile. Why did you not refuse the match?" Ethan met her gaze. "Because I thought maybe the AI saw something important. Something people overlook," she raised a brow. "You believe a machine knows me better than I know myself?" "No," Ethan said calmly. "But maybe it sees possibilities. Sometimes people only see what they expect. They call you a weapon, a conqueror. Maybe the AI saw something else." Kalira's eyes narrowed. And what do you think it saw? Ethan hesitated. His words had to be careful. I think it saw someone who's more than her battles. For the first time, Kalira's expression softened slightly, but it lasted only a heartbeat. She leaned back, her armor creaking. You speak boldly for one so weak. Do not mistake my patience for acceptance. Ethan gave a small smile. I'll remember that. The training ground after breakfast, Kalira ordered Ethan to follow her. They walked through winding corridors until they reached the fortress courtyard. It was vast, ringed by stone walls and filled with warriors practicing combat. The ground shook as blades clashed and training machines roared to life. Kalira gestured around them. This is the heart of my people. Strength, discipline, and battle. Without these, the Dravathi would fall. Ethan nodded, though the sheer intensity of the training unsettled him. He saw warriors twice his size swing blades that could cleave a man in half. The air was thick with sweat, metal, and pride. Kalira crossed her arms, watching him closely. If you are to remain here, you must understand. Show me what strength you carry. Ethan blinked. Me? Against them? A faint smirk tugged at her lips. Not against them. Against me, his stomach dropped. You want me to fight you? Not fight, Kalira said, stepping forward. Survive. Before Ethan could protest, she moved. She didn't strike with full force. He knew she could break him with one hit. But her movements were swift and sharp, meant to test his reactions. Ethan ducked as her hand shot toward his shoulder. He stumbled back, heart pounding. Kalira advanced, her golden eyes gleaming. He dodged again, narrowly avoiding her grasp. Around them, Dravathi warriors stopped their training and turned to watch. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. Ethan breathed hard, his body moving out of instinct. He could not fight her strength with strength. Instead, he relied on speed, slipping aside just before her hands closed around him. Finally, Kalira stepped back and raised a hand, signaling an end. She looked at him silently for a long moment. You cannot win, she said, but you do not surrender easily. That is unexpected. Ethan bent forward, catching his breath. I told you I didn't come here to run away. The faintest glimmer of respect flickered in her eyes. She turned to the watching warriors. Return to training, the crowd dispersed. Though Ethan noticed some warriors glanced at him differently now. Not as a fragile outsider, but as someone who had at least dared to stand before their general. A glimpse behind the mask that evening. Ethan wandered through the fortress. He found a quiet balcony overlooking the city, where the glow of crimson lights reflected against the night sky. To his surprise, Kalira was already there. She stood alone, her cape flowing in the breeze, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Ethan hesitated before stepping closer. Do you ever rest? Kalira did not turn. A general cannot afford rest. My people depend on me. Even generals need a moment to breathe, Ethan said softly. Silence stretched between them. Then Kalira spoke, her voice lower than before. When I was a child, I was taken from my family and raised in the war academies. Every day was training. Every night was lessons. By the time I was grown, I knew nothing but battle. The galaxy calls me a weapon because that is what I was made to be. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He had suspected loneliness, but hearing it in her own words made it real. Maybe that's why the AI matched us, he said gently. Because it saw that even the strongest person needs someone who sees them as more than their strength. Kalira turned at last, her golden eyes meeting his. For once there was no hardness in them, only a quiet, aching weariness. You speak as if you understand me, she murmured. I don't, Ethan admitted. Not yet, but I want to. For a long moment, Kalira said nothing. Then she turned back to the city. But her voice, when it came again, was softer. Perhaps, we will see if you can. Whispers of doubt over the next few days. Ethan's presence in the fortress stirred whispers. Many Dravathi warriors disapproved. They saw him as weak, unworthy of standing beside their general. Some mocked him openly. Others simply ignored him as if he were invisible. Yet Kalira never dismissed him. She continued to test him, bringing him to council meetings, training grounds, and inspections. She rarely praised him, but she also never sent him away. Ethan learned to watch carefully, to listen more than he spoke. He saw the way Kalira carried herself with absolute control in public, but when she thought no one was watching, her shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of command pressed too heavily on her. One evening, during a small council meeting, a Dravathi officer challenged the match directly. "This human weakens you, General," the officer said harshly. "The Dominion needs a mate of strength, not a fragile outsider." The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to Kalira. For a moment, Ethan thought she would agree, but Kalira's gaze swept over the council, sharp as a blade. "Do not mistake quietness for weakness," she said firmly. "The AI does not choose at random. This union is a test for him and for me. I will decide its worth." "Not you," the officer bowed, silenced. Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest. Kalira had defended him, even if only with words. Alone in the fortress later that night, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. He paced the corridors until he reached the training ground again. It was empty, quiet under the pale glow of lights. He picked up a practice staff lying on the ground. It felt heavy in his hands, clumsy. He swung it a few times, trying to mimic the movements he had seen the warriors use. But the staff almost slipped from his grip. "You hold it wrong." Ethan spun around. Kalira stood in the shadows, watching him. She stepped forward, her presence filling the space. She took the staff from his hands and demonstrated, her movements smooth and precise. Then she handed it back. Again, Ethan copied her stance. Awkward at first, but slowly, with her corrections, he improved. Hours passed without him noticing. Finally, Kalira stepped back, nodding slightly. "You learn quickly. Not enough to fight, but enough to understand." Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled. "Maybe one day I'll surprise you." For the first time, Kalira almost smiled. It was small, fleeting, but real. "Perhaps," she said softly. Closing scene of Part 2A's dawn broke. Ethan and Kalira stood together at the edge of the training ground. The sun rose over the fortress walls, casting light across the city. For the first time since his arrival, Ethan felt a sense of belonging, not because he was strong, but because Kalira had allowed him to stand beside her. And Kalira, though she said nothing, felt something unfamiliar stir within her chest. A small warmth, fragile but persistent. The galaxy still called her the deadliest bride. But standing next to Ethan, she wondered if perhaps, for the first time, she might be seen as something else. The days in Kalira's fortress passed quickly for Ethan Ward. At first, every moment had felt like a test he might fail, but now he began to find a rhythm. He rose early, joined Kalira for meals, walked with her through the fortress, and watched her command the respect of an entire world. Though she was always stern, Kalira no longer kept him at a distance. She allowed him to stand beside her during council meetings, even when others doubted his presence. She even corrected his clumsy training with patience, though her words were sharp. Ethan knew she was still guarded, still wrapped in the armor of a warrior who had never known softness. But each day he saw small cracks appear, moments when her voice grew gentler, or her gaze lingered longer than before. He began to hope, but peace never lasted long in the Dominion. Rumors of rebellion. One evening, as the fortress lights dimmed to mimic night, Ethan overheard whispers among the guards. They spoke of movements in the outer sectors, fleets gathering, banners raised. The name on their lips was Varrock, a powerful Dravathi warlord who had long opposed Kalira's leadership. Ethan did not interrupt, but the unease in their voices stayed with him. Later, when he sat with Kalira in the council chamber, he gathered the courage to ask, "Who is Varrock?" he said softly. Kalira's golden eyes sharpened. For a moment she said nothing. Then her voice came low, like a blade sliding from its sheath. "He was once a general under my command, proud, ambitious, and reckless. When I rose to lead, he challenged me. I defeated him, but I spared his life. A mistake I may now regret," Ethan frowned. "And now he's planning something?" Kalira looked toward the great star map glowing before them. Fleets and territories shone in red and silver. She pointed to the outer rim. "My scouts report movement here. Varrock gathers those who despise the Union, who despise the idea of peace. To them, my match with you is proof that I have grown weak." Ethan's chest tightened. "Because of me?" Kalira turned to face him. Her expression was stern, but her voice held no anger. "They would use any excuse. Do not carry that weight. Varrock seeks power, not truth." Still, Ethan could not shake the guilt pressing against him. He had come here with open hands, hoping only to understand her. But now his presence threatened to ignite war. The council divided. The next day, Kalira called a full council. The chamber filled with Dravathi commanders, their armor shining under the crystal lights. Ethan sat quietly near the edge, listening. One by one, officers spoke of Varrock's growing forces. Some demanded immediate attack. Others urged caution. But many, Ethan noticed, turned their eyes toward him. At last, one commander stood. His voice was deep and angry. "General, this rebellion rises because of weakness. The AI match has made you a symbol of softness. How can our enemies fear you when you sit beside a human who could not lift a sword?" The chamber erupted in murmurs. Ethan felt heat rise to his face, but he stayed silent. Kalira rose slowly from her seat. Her voice cut through the noise like thunder. "Enough. Do you think fear alone rules an empire? Fear wins battles. But respect wins loyalty. Do you question my strength? Then challenge me, here, now." The commander's eyes widened. Silence fell. None moved. Kalira's gaze swept across the hall. "Then hear me well. This human is under my protection. His worth is mine to judge, not yours. Varrock may rise, but I will not be shaken by his lies, and neither will you." Her words ended the argument, but Ethan knew the doubts remained. He could feel them in the stares that lingered on him as the council dispersed. When the chamber emptied, Kalira turned to him. For the first time there was no mask on her face, only weariness. "They will not stop questioning," she murmured. Ethan met her eyes. "Then let me prove them wrong." A human's way that night, Ethan sat alone, thinking. He was no warrior. He could not fight Varrock's soldiers. But he had learned something in his years of quiet maintenance work. Problems could be solved in ways that did not involve brute force. The Dravathi were masters of combat, but sometimes their pride blinded them to simpler solutions. Ethan remembered how he had once saved a mining colony by reprogramming broken machines that everyone else had given up on. Maybe in his own way he could do something here too. The next morning he sought Kalira in the training ground. She was sparring with two warriors at once, her movements swift and precise. When she ended the fight with both warriors on the ground, Ethan stepped forward. "I want to help," he said. Kalira raised a brow. "With a sword you can barely hold?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "With my mind. Let me study Varrock's movements. Let me look at the data, the supply lines, the patrol reports. Sometimes weakness is not in strength, but in planning." For a long moment, Kalira studied him. Then slowly she nodded. "Very well. You will work with my strategists. But remember, if you fail, it will be your life, not theirs, that I answer for." Ethan swallowed hard but nodded. "Understood." Discovering a pattern days turned into nights as Ethan pored over maps, reports, and data logs. The Dravathi strategists were surprised by his persistence. He asked questions they had not considered. How much fuel Varrock's ships used, how often his supply lines stretched thin, how long his soldiers could march before exhaustion. The Dravathi thought in terms of honor and direct combat. Ethan thought in terms of limits and pressure points. One evening, as he studied the reports again, he noticed a pattern. Varrock's fleets moved in wide arcs, always avoiding certain sectors. Not out of fear, out of necessity. Those sectors lacked fuel stations and supply bases. Ethan realized that if Kalira blocked just two key points, Varrock's entire fleet would be forced into a trap. Excited, he rushed to Kalira's chambers. She was alone, sharpening her blade, but she listened as he laid out his findings. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. Then slowly a rare smile touched her lips. "You see what others do not," she said quietly. This may work." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him. Not because she praised him, but because for the first time she looked at him not as a fragile outsider, but as a partner. The storm approaches. But even as they prepared, Varrock's shadow grew darker. His ships appeared at the edges of Kalira's territory, raiding small colonies, burning villages. Refugees arrived at the capital, their stories filled with fear. One night, as Kalira and Ethan stood on the balcony, watching the fires from distant battles glow on the horizon, she spoke softly. "I should have killed him when I had the chance," she said. "Now his hatred spreads like disease." Ethan placed his hand on the cold stone railing. "If you had killed him, maybe others would have risen in his place. Maybe this is the test you were meant to face, not with a sword, but with a choice." Kalira turned her golden eyes toward him. "You speak as if this is destiny." "Maybe not destiny," Ethan said with a small smile. "But maybe opportunity." For a long time she held his gaze. Then she turned back to the horizon, though her voice was softer than before. Perhaps. The first strike, it was not long before Varrock struck openly. His fleet appeared near the border, overwhelming a small outpost. Kalera responded immediately, leading her warships into battle. Ethan remained in the command center, watching the star maps glow with shifting signals. The Dravathi commanders roared their reports, their voices full of fire. But Ethan saw something they did not. Varrock's fleet was moving exactly as he had predicted. He leaned over the console. "Kalera, he's pushing you toward Sector 9. If you follow, you'll walk into his trap. Block the supply line here instead, cut him off." For a moment, the commanders bristled. A human giving orders? Unthinkable. But Kalera raised her hand, silencing them. "Do it," she commanded. The fleet shifted. Moments later, Varrock's ship slowed, struggling to maintain formation. His trap had failed. Kalera pressed the attack, striking hard and fast. The outpost was saved and Varrock's forces retreated in chaos. When the battle ended, the command center erupted in cheers. Warriors clapped each other on the back, roaring in triumph. But Kalera's gaze found Ethan. Her eyes were steady, unreadable, yet filled with something new. "Respect. You were right," she said simply. Ethan's heart raced. "So were you. I told you I wouldn't run." Closing scene of Part 3. That night, Kalera and Ethan stood together once more on the balcony. The fires of battle had faded and the stars shone brightly above. Kalera spoke quietly, her voice almost lost in the wind. "The Council was wrong about you. You are not weak. You are different. And sometimes different is what we need." Ethan looked at her, his chest tight with unspoken words. But he only smiled. Then maybe the AI knew what it was doing after all. Kalera did not smile, but her eyes softened. And for the first time, Ethan felt that the bond between them was no longer just a fragile thread. It was the beginning of something strong enough to face even the storms of war. The galaxy had been watching for weeks. News of Kalera's unusual marriage with a human had already spread far. But now, with a Dravathi warlord preparing his fleets, every world wanted to know if the Deadliest bride had truly grown weaker, or if this was only a false rumor. Inside the command hall of Kalera's flagship, the Iron Fang, hundreds of officers studied star maps floating in blue light. Kalera stood tall at the front, her armored hand pointing at enemy movements displayed in glowing arcs. Her presence was sharp, steady, and full of command. Ethan stood a little behind her, not in armor, not carrying any weapon, but quietly observing everything. He had been given a seat, but he rarely sat. His eyes followed the shifting lights, the star routes, and the formations that looked like waves in a sea. "Warlord Cernak believes me distracted," Kalera said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "He thinks marrying a human has softened me. He thinks this will be the moment to take what I built." She paused, her silver eyes narrowing. "He is wrong," the officers roared in agreement. To them, Kalera was not just a leader. She was the shield of their people. But Ethan noticed something different. For all her strong words, her shoulders seemed heavier than before. When her gaze flicked toward him for half a second, he saw not just determination but a quiet fear. Fear not for herself, but for what might happen if she failed. When the meeting ended, Kalera stepped aside to a private chamber. Ethan followed. There, with no soldiers watching, her armor seemed less like protection and more like a prison. "You stood silent," she said, her tone firm but not angry. "Do you think I made a mistake in my orders?" Ethan shook his head. "No, you know your people. You know your enemy." "But I was thinking about the maps," she raised an eyebrow. "The maps?" Ethan pointed at one star path. "Cernak's fleet is moving in predictable patterns. Everyone expects him to strike at the strongest point of your defenses. But if I were him, I wouldn't attack where you're ready. I'd go around, slip past, and strike where you're not looking." Kalera tilted her head. Her mind was trained for battle, but Ethan's words forced her to look again. He didn't think like a warrior. He thought like a problem solver. "You suggest he will try to cut supply lines," she said slowly. "Or hit a colony you don't expect," Ethan added. "Something that will make your people afraid, not just your soldiers. Fear is as strong a weapon as guns." For a moment, Kalera studied him, her sharp gaze softening. Then she gave a rare smile, small but real. "You see patterns where my generals do not. I just notice things," Ethan replied. "Back on Earth, I was just a technician. fixing small systems, making sure things didn't break down. I guess I look for the weak spots. Kalira placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. And perhaps that is what I need. Not another blade, but eyes that see differently. The first clash the next day, Cernak's fleet appeared on the edge of Dravathi space. Thousands of warships lit the dark void like a storm of fire. Kalira's fleet moved to intercept, forming lines that had broken countless enemies before. Ethan stood at Kalira's side on the command bridge. Officers rushed to and fro, giving reports while the stars outside shifted with burning trails. The battle began with thunder. Energy beams slashed across space, shields flared, and the sound of distant impacts hummed through the ship. Kalira commanded with calm precision, her voice steady even as enemy fire rained against their defenses. But then, just as Ethan feared, the enemy's main force did not strike the strongest point. Instead, smaller divisions split off, heading toward undefended colonies and trade lines. "They are moving around us," shouted one officer. Kalira's jaw tightened. She had expected strength, but not this cunning. She glanced at Ethan, who met her gaze without fear. "This is what I warned about," he said. "They want you to chase them." Kalira nodded. "Then we will not give them what they want." She issued new commands, redirecting a portion of her fleet not to chase blindly, but to guard key points Ethan had noticed earlier. When the enemy forces arrived at those points, they found defenses waiting. Cernak's plan began to unravel. Testing courage after hours of battle, the Iron Fang shook from a near impact. Sparks burst from one console and smoke filled the air. Kalira's officers rushed to control the damage. Ethan, though not trained for war, moved among them, helping where he could. His hands fixed power conduits, rerouted systems, and calmed panicked crew members. To him, it was not very different from his work back on Earth. Machines broke and he fixed them. But to the crew, seeing a human who refused to hide, who worked beside them in danger, sparked respect. Later, when the enemy pulled back for a short retreat, Kalira approached him quietly. Her eyes held something unusual, concern. "You should not have been near the fire," she said. "If you were hurt," Ethan gave a tired smile. "If I stayed hidden, I'd only be another problem for your people to protect. This way I could help." Kalira's throat tightened with unspoken words. No soldier had ever made her feel this way, not even her own generals. Ethan was not stronger than her, not faster, not more deadly, yet his courage was of a different kind, and that made it shine even brighter. The turning point days passed. The battles grew fiercer. Cernak grew desperate, throwing more fleets at Kalira. But with Ethan's insights and Kalira's strength, they adapted again and again. Still, one final strike came, an ambush near the twin moons of Rethar. The Iron Fang was caught in the middle of enemy fire, surrounded on three sides. "Shields at 30%, cried a crew member. Kalira gripped her blade-like command staff. She knew the danger. For the first time, she almost considered retreat. But then Ethan, standing beside her, leaned close and whispered, "He thinks he has trapped you. But look again. He is the one overextending. If you break through here," he pointed at one side of the star map, "his ships will crash into each other trying to regroup." Kalira's eyes widened. It was a bold, risky move, but she trusted him. "Full power to the left flank," she commanded. "Break the chain!" The fleet surged forward. Fire rained down, but the Dravathi ships cut through the weak point Ethan had noticed. In minutes, Cernak's formation collapsed into chaos. His ships collided, his orders lost in the storm. Cheers erupted on the Iron Fang. The enemy was retreating, broken. Victory in truth. When the battle ended, silence fell on the bridge. Exhausted crew members slumped in their seats, but their faces glowed with pride. They had won not just with strength, but with unity. Kalira turned to Ethan. In front of everyone, she lowered her weapon and placed it against her chest, a sign of respect rarely given. "This victory belongs not only to me," she said loudly, "but also to the human who stood at my side." The crew banged their fists on the tables in salute. Ethan felt his face heat with embarrassment, but he also felt something else: acceptance. Later, when they were finally alone in her private chamber, Kalira removed her armor. For the first time, she looked less like a warrior and more like a person, weary yet strong. "You gave me more than strategy," she said quietly. "You gave me faith again. All my life I was told I was a weapon, a symbol of fear. But with you beside me, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt seen. Ethan met her eyes. You're not just the galaxy's deadliest warrior, Kalira. You're a person. And no person should carry loneliness alone. For a moment, her expression softened completely. No council, no soldiers, no war. Only two people standing together in quiet understanding. The galaxy might still whisper about their strange union, but here in this moment, Kalira knew the truth. Strength was not only found in battle. Sometimes strength was found in the courage to open one's heart. The battle was over. Cernak's fleets had scattered, broken by Kalira's sharp command and Ethan's unusual insight. Across the galaxy, whispers spread like fire. Some spoke in awe, others in disbelief. The deadliest bride had won again, but not with Dravathi steel alone. She had fought with a human at her side. Inside the grand hangar of the Iron Fang, soldiers and workers cheered as Kalira walked past. Their voices echoed against the walls, not in fear as before, but in pride. They saluted her, their leader, their protector. But many eyes also turned to Ethan, the quiet human who had stood where no other dared. Ethan felt awkward under the attention. He was not used to being in the center. On Earth, he had always been the one fixing things quietly in the background. But now the galaxy looked at him as if he were something more. Kalira walked with her usual strength, but inside she was restless. Victory had given her people safety, but it had also brought a new storm. The Galactic Council had summoned her to defend her choices. Rumors said many leaders wanted her marriage dissolved. Some saw Ethan as a weakness, others as a danger. As she prepared for the journey to the Council's world, Kalira found Ethan standing at one of the ship's windows, watching the stars. "You do not like attention," she said. He smiled faintly. "I guess not. Back home, nobody ever looked at me twice. Now everyone stares like I've done something impossible." "You have," Kalira answered simply. "You stood with me." Ethan turned to her. "But the Council doesn't care about that, do they?" Kalira's jaw tightened. "No, to them appearances are everything. They want me to be strong in the way they understand, through power, through fear. They cannot understand that strength can look different." Ethan studied her carefully. Beneath the armor, beneath the sharp voice, he saw again the woman who had once sat across from him in silence, hiding loneliness behind command. He reached out, gently taking her hand. "Then we'll show them," he said softly. The Council world, the Council planet, GalacticPrime, floated like a shining jewel in the dark. Its surface glittered with towers of light and rings of floating stations. It was said every major species in the galaxy had a seat there. Decisions made in its halls shaped the lives of billions. When Kalira's ship descended, news networks swarmed. Screens across the station showed her image, the tall, armored general with silver eyes, and at her side, a human man in simple clothes. Commentators argued endlessly. Was this union a trick, a weakness, or the beginning of something new? Inside the Council's grand chamber, hundreds of leaders filled the circular hall. Their voices echoed like thunder. At the center stood a raised platform where Kalira and Ethan were called to speak. The High Speaker, a being of crystalline form, lifted a hand. "General Kalira of the Dravathi," it said, voice sharp like breaking glass. "You stand here to explain your actions. You married outside your kind, against tradition. You risked the balance of peace. And now you bring this human before us as though he were an equal." Murmurs spread across the chamber. Some eyes burned with scorn. Others watched with curiosity. Kalira stood tall. "I do not apologize," she said firmly. "I chose freely. The AI matchmaker united us, yes, but it was not code that kept us together. It was choice. It was truth." The speaker's light flickered. "And what truth is that?" "That's strength," Kalira declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "Is not only the blade, not only the fleet. Strength is also courage without armor. Strength is also the will to stand when the galaxy expects you to fall. This human Ethan Ward has shown me that truth." The chamber shook with voices, some angry, some astonished. A reptilian senator hissed loudly. "He is fragile, a soft being from a soft world. How can such a one be worthy of you?" Ethan took a slow breath. His heart pounded, but he stepped forward. His voice was not loud like Kalira's, but steady. "You're right," he said. "I'm not strong like her. I can't fight battles the way Dravathi do. I'm just human. Back home I fixed broken machines. But maybe that's the point. Strength doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it's fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's standing by someone so they don't have to be alone. The chamber quieted. His words were simple, almost too plain for such a grand hall, but there was weight in them. Kalira looked at him with pride glowing in her eyes. The speaker leaned forward. And what of politics? What of alliances? Do you expect the galaxy to respect a bond between warrior and human? Kalira's voice rang out like steel. Respect is earned. Did I not defeat Cernak? Did I not protect worlds that were not even mine to guard? You doubt because of appearances. But appearances do not win wars. Unity does. For a long moment, silence filled the hall. Then one by one, a few council members began to nod. A winged envoy from a distant system rose and spoke. She is right. Fear alone cannot hold us together. Perhaps this bond is not weakness but a path forward. Others muttered in disagreement, but the seed was planted. Private moments after the hearing, Kalira and Ethan were given a private chamber. For hours they sat together, waiting for the council's decision. Outside, news channels debated endlessly. Kalira removed her armor piece by piece, setting it aside. She looked at Ethan with an expression few ever saw. I have faced armies, she said quietly. I have stood against blades and fire. But speaking in that chamber, I feared more than in battle. Ethan smiled gently. Because in battle you knew your strength, but here you had to show something more. Kalira tilted her head. And you? Were you afraid? He laughed softly, terrified. But then I looked at you and I thought, if you can stand there and be yourself, then maybe I can too. For a moment, silence stretched between them, not empty but full, the kind of silence that felt like home. Decision of the council. The next day, the council returned with its judgment. The High Speaker addressed the hall. After long debate, this council recognizes the union of General Kalira and Ethan Ward as valid. It is not for us to break what was freely chosen. Let it be recorded this bond stands. Gasps filled the chamber. Some voices shouted in protest, but the decision was sealed. Outside, crowds erupted. Some cheered, some doubted, but none could ignore the truth. The galaxy had changed. Beyond Title's back on the Iron Fang, Kalira stood with Ethan in the observation dome, watching stars drift past. The war was over, the council's judgment given. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar. Peace. You changed everything, she told him. Ethan shook his head. No, you did. I just stood with you. Kalira smiled, rare and soft. Perhaps that is what I needed most. Not another warrior, not another blade. Just someone who would not leave. He squeezed her hand. And I'm not leaving. Outside the window, the galaxy stretched endless and vast. Worlds still spun, wars still brewed, but for this moment they stood together. Not as general and technician, not as symbol and weakness, but simply as two souls who had found each other. And in that vast silence, Kalira, once called the galaxy's deadliest, no longer felt lonely. Epilogue, a different future years later. Stories of their bond spread far beyond Dravati space. Children of different worlds grew up hearing about the human who stood with the fiercest general, and about the warrior who chose not power, but companionship. Some saw it as legend, others as inspiration. But for Kalira and Ethan, it was never about legend. It was about a choice to believe that even in a galaxy of war and fear, connection was possible. And so when the stars called them forward again, they answered, not as symbols of strength alone, but as proof that humanity's greatest power was never its weapons but its heart.